in that session. But our first today, we have our keynote session. U.S. Federal Addressing Initiatives, FGDC, Census, Department of Transportation, and U.S. Postal Service. This session will provide an overview and update on the key U.S. federal initiatives and standards for addressing. This morning, we're lucky to have speakers from the 3 key U.S. federal agencies leading initiatives on addressing and road center lines: Census, Department of Transportation, and U.S. Postal Service. We've asked the speakers to describe, in the time available, how addressing fits into their agency missions and the programs or products of their agency that would be of interest to us. Given the timing, I'll ask you that you submit your questions via chat. We'll answer them at the end of the session as time permits. And we'll begin with Matt Zimolzak, who is a supervisory geographer at the Census Bureau. He's worked for the U.S. Census Bureau for more than 25 years, covering 4 decennial censuses since 1989, with a 5-year break working for local government as a GIS technician during the 1990s in southern New Jersey. He is currently the co-theme lead for the FGDC Address Theme and Subcommittee and co-chair of the FGDC Address Subcommittee, helping to lead and coordinate topics of importance to the address data community. Matt is also project manager for the Census Bureau Geography Division's Spatial Address and Imagery Program, a partnership program aimed at acquiring federal, state, tribal, and local government spatial and imagery data to assist the census in maintaining its master address file and topologically integrated geocoded and reference database, MTDB for short. So Matt will update us on the Geospatial Data Act, Census, and FGDC Address Data Standard. Matt, let me stop screen sharing and hand it over to you.
Okay, Ed, I'm trying to get there.
You are live on screen.
Okay, now look. All right, very good.
Looks perfect.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Zimolzak from the U.S. Census Bureau. Thanks for that kind introduction, Ed. While we were working on putting together the presentation for today, Ed and I exchanged some email, and he said it'd be great for you to let our audience know what your organization does and how that ties in with addresses. Unfortunately, that was before or after the deadline for my management review of the presentation. So I'm going to describe it to you with my voice, but you won't see this on the screen, and I'll be as brief as possible. So the Census Bureau's primary mission is to take the decennial census, that's the population count, once every 10 years, and that's mandated by the Constitution of the United States, and its primary but not only purpose is for reapportionment of the House of Representatives in Congress. The population count is for states, but of course we produce population counts down to very small levels of geography, going from states through counties and municipalities, census tracts, block groups, and blocks, as well as other types of entities. Operationally, you can sum up what we do at the Census Bureau in 2 things: collect the data and publish the data. So what is the support and the tie into the addresses? Our address list that we use is called the master address file. That is the main or really the primary address resource at the Census Bureau. We call it the MAF for short, and that contains all of the addresses that we have ever interacted with some small exceptions, in the past 20 plus years. We joke at the Census Bureau that nothing ever dies in the MAF, although there are a few minor exceptions to that. So the MAF, that address list, is part of what Ed described as the MAF Tiger database. In more recent years, we've been moving that description to the MAF Tiger system as our acronym, because it really is a system. And the Tiger part of that system, topologically integrated and geographic referencing and encoding system, that is where the features and geography is stored, the framework by which we collect and publish census data. So the master address file is the main address resource for the Census Bureau. And within it, we have what we call frames. And those frames are used for different purposes. There's one frame for the decennial census, one frame for the American Community Survey, ACS, what is the from 2004, as well as program participation, the SIP survey, NHIS. They support other what we call current surveys at the Census Bureau, and those frames are defined by their filters. So we'd like addresses that have these characteristics and currencies and not some of these others in brief. So Map Tiger system, the map, and that's how addresses ties into the work that we do at the Census Bureau. It supports our taking of the decennial census, enumeration of all the residential population in the United States, as well as many other purposes, American Community Survey, current surveys, and population estimates program. So that's a huge resource for us. Okay, let's get into the main part of the presentation. Per Ed's introduction, let's talk a little bit about the Geospatial Data Act. If you haven't taken a look at this yet, I highly recommend it. If you work in the spatial data industry, whether government or private or academic or nonprofit, everybody should be aware of this. So it was signed into law by the President on October 5th of 2018. And it codifies into law many of the geospatial documents and concepts that have been in place, including the Office of Management and Budget Circular A16 and the National Spatial Data Infrastructure Strategic Plan. It creates a new relationship between the FGDC and Congress with required annual reports for covered agencies. It elevates the role of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, or NGAC, in FGDC reporting requirements. And it includes a requirement for departmental level reporting conducted by the Office of the Inspector General. So what does the GDA impact? It impacts the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, or NSDI, strategic plan. It impacts the OMB Circular A16, which is a detailed document of agency guidance of how to implement the aspects of both the GDA at a high level and the specifics of the NSDI at a medium level, I would call it. And the last update we have is revisions were delivered to OMB towards the end of July of last year. We don't have the final A16 as of yet. Annual reporting requirements for covered agencies and lead covered agencies are two important aspects of the GDA impacts. What else does it impact? The Federal Geographic Data Committee, or FGDC, it incorporates National Geospatial Advisory Committee, or NGAC, input to the reporting coming out of the FGDC. It impacts department and agency strategic plans, so that's now a feature of the work we do in the federal government. At departmental and agency levels, we develop and implement strategic plans with goals and objectives. The National Geospatial Data Asset data themes, including theme strategic plans. So every one of the 19 NGDA data themes should be thinking about or already developing, or in a few cases maybe already implemented, a theme strategic plan. And finally, the National Geospatial Data Assets, or NGDAs. These are the key national spatial data sets. And my colleague Steve will talk a little bit more about one of them. So what are four key GDA initiatives? So number one, emphasis on assessing, developing, and adhering to data standards. And that includes national and international and industry standards. Consider them in your process? What do you need to adopt to support data sets in your theme? Is there a blending? Is there an evolution? Do you need to add elements to standards? This impacts content, metadata, accuracy, dissemination, and probably other aspects of spatial data that we've yet to consider. But those are some of the attributes that the standards will be impacting and that you need to consider. And it should be consistent with OMB Circular A-119 when that is developed and delivered. Number two, nationwide population of themed spatial data through the following aspects. So when we're talking about the Federal Geographic Data Committee, we're looking at what constitutes national coverage. Simply, when you think of national coverage, it's going to cover the 50 states and the District of Columbia and probably Puerto Rico and island areas. But depending on what your spatial data theme or data set is, it may not be the entire nation. It may just be a part of the nation that's relevant to that particular data set. That said, how does that get implemented? It's through partnerships with tribal, federal, state, and local governments, as well as the private sector, academia, NGOs, basically the whole body of stakeholders. Look at engaging with and developing partnerships with that whole body of stakeholders at various levels and institutions. Assess user needs. What are the capabilities that you're trying to support with data sets in your theme? Human and financial needs, the support for doing this work. So agencies are tasked with bringing these data sets together, putting them together at a national level. What type of human and infrastructure resources do you need to support that? That should be part of your agency budgeting process. Standards and metadata needs for consistency and discoverability. So adherence to standards, once again, this is a really big imperative within the GDA. So the data is comparable at all levels, as well as metadata needs. So it's easily discoverable by anyone in the user community or other stakeholders who wants to be able to use this data to support their purpose. Consistency and discoverability. Okay. And then finally, NGDA data theme needs the content. So themes tend to be at a high level in terms of the spatial data that they're representing, and within your themes, most themes have multiple NGDAs, National Geospatial Data Assets, representing different aspects of that theme in order to meet the mission. So what kind of content do you need to support the broad goals of your theme? Number three, supporting the goals and objectives of the NSDI strategic plan. That includes adhering to OMB Circular A16, the direction and support of the FGDC, which includes its operational hierarchy. There was a hierarchy that was in use for quite some time, and that is under discussion as to how that may be reorganized in the near future. Collaboration with the NGAC, National Geospatial Advisory Committee, theme subcommittees, the groups that discuss the work and the needs of the theme, comprised of the stakeholders, and working groups, which are subsets of these folks who focus on specific aspects or issues needed to support the mission of the theme. Department and agency strategic plans, incorporating the guidance of the NSDI and A16 into the strategic plans for at the agency level. So the agencies are focused on meeting those goals and objectives. Theme strategic plans, so the stakeholder body is contributing towards developing a theme strategic plan to support the NSDI and the guidance in OMB A16. and of course the NGDAs, the key national data sets. What data sets do you need to support the content needs of your theme? And finally, number 4, addressing user needs. So 2 aspects of this. Go forth and seek, collect, and analyze user information. So who's using the data? What purpose do they want to use the data for? How can you help support that? And that flows into assessing and incorporating these user needs in the theme strategic plan. So that's a key aspect, is to incorporate the needs of users into
Matt, we've lost your voice for a minute.
to your theme strategic plan. Have a little bit in the hierarchy from the GDA to focus on the FGDC address standard. So the original version of the FGDC address standard was published in 2011 and was endorsed at the time by the FGDC. I have to put that disclaimer in now because the GDA is involving a lot of change at the FGDC. And what I've heard in various meetings is folks at higher levels using the terminology, nothing is currently endorsed by the FGDC until the frameworks will be implemented per the guidance of the GDA and the NSDI and ultimately OMB A16. But it's fair to say that formally it was endorsed in 2011. There were revisions proposed in 2015, but these revisions did not make it through the full revision and endorsement process at the time, so they remain proposed revisions to the FGDC address standard. The GDA is affecting significant changes to the way the FGDC does business, and there are no currently endorsed FGDC standards. The revival of the former FGDC standards working group is under current consideration with significant support from key stakeholders at the FGDC. And this group would have a significant role in the development, assessment, endorsement of standards at the FGDC and associated with the data sets within the 19 themes. So how does the FGDC address theme relate to the address subcommittee, which is the stakeholder group for the address theme, the gathering of the various levels of government, private sector, academia, NGOs, and other stakeholders. The FGDC address theme is a subject and content home for address spatial data. Census Bureau and DOT are the co-theme leads for the FGDC address theme. And currently there is one NGDA, or National Geospatial Data Asset, the National Address Database, or NAV. And Steve will talk more about that. The FGDC Address Subcommittee is the primary stakeholder body for the address spatial data, and it's administered by federal agency personnel, which includes myself and Steve Lewis. We are the co-chairs for the FGDC Address Subcommittee. Within the subcommittee, which is like a discussion forum, meeting place to share information, discuss ideas, set directions, there are subgroups. And the subgroups are the apparatuses by which the work of the subcommittee primarily gets done. So this is where detailed discussions are occurring, work products are being created, white papers, etc. This is where the work gets done. And there's 4 currently active subgroups of the FGDC address subcommittee. The first is, I'll go into varying levels of detail based on this particular audience, and there's one that I won't be discussing at all. So one of them is the address content. So the 4 are the address content, address workflow, NAD strategies, and address standards maintenance subgroups. So the address content subgroup authored the NAD content proposal and the NAD content requirements document, which is currently under review by the subcommittee co-chairs. And the initial work of this group is largely done, so it will be going into hiatus for a while, although there are a few smaller lingering issues that we think it will take up periodically from time to time. So the NAD content requirements considered the FGDC address standard, the NINA NG 911 GIS data standard, and the NAD pilot schema, among other factors in its development. So
Matt, just to note, if I may, it's
yes.
now about 20 minutes past the hour.
Okay, I think I have 2 slides left. Appreciate the reminder. The address workflow subgroup authored state and federal draft address workflow charts and description documents and an address validations matrix. Related to these documents, it's coming off a year-long hiatus, going back into its work, and the address standards maintenance subgroup was formed in June 2021. It is tasked with reviewing and suggesting modifications to the existing FGDC address standard, and it's meeting monthly. So this is the one that's most relevant to the FGDC address standard. It includes a broad set of stakeholders in the federal, state, territories, and local government communities, and stakeholder organizations such as NSGIC and URISA. Address standard maintenance subgroup is looking at modifications to the address component parsing examples guidance, Puerto Rico specific address components, formalization of map position proposal, and alignment of FGDC transportation and address standards, among other issues. Recommendations from this subgroup will be considered, potentially modified and finalized by the address subcommittee, and final approval of the FGDC is required, going through the likely standards work group. How does all of this impact what we do at the Census Bureau? We already talked about co-theme lead and co-chairing activities. The Census Bureau, myself, is also the data set manager for the NAD, which is responsible for metadata and life cycle maturity. But the NAD is not census data. And the Census Bureau is the theme lead for another of the themes, the FGDC governmental units theme, and is the chair of the National Boundary Group, and is data set manager for 33 of the 37 NGDAs for the governmental units theme. So these are various governmental entities like states, counties, municipalities, statistical areas at a national level. Legal, statistical, administrative entity boundaries are census disseminated data. Okay, with that, I'll leave the questions for the end. I'll stop sharing. Appreciate your time and attention.
Ed Wells, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute me. Steve, up to you. Steve is the Geospatial Information Officer for the U.S. Department of Transportation. And with Matt Zimolzak, he co-chairs the Address Team Subcommittee of the FGDC and is co-lead on the National Address Database Project. And Steve will give us an update on the National Address Database Project. Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Ed. Can everybody see my screen?
We see you.
See you.
Let's try that again. How about now?
Screen. Yep.
Good.
All right. So thanks for the introduction, Ed. I'm going to talk today specifically about the National Address Database, which is a project that's been near and dear to my heart for almost 7 years now. So why a National Address Database? Well, I think everybody in the geospatial community agrees that address data is a fundamental geospatial layer, and address points are critical for emergency response. Before the creation of the NAD, there was no authoritative nationwide public domain GIS database of addresses. Matt, who just finished talking from the Census Bureau, and Liz, who'll speak after me, both those agencies have nationwide data sets, but they're protected behind Titles 13 and 39. So 7 years ago, after consultation with address stakeholders throughout the community, We took a leadership role and began to compile the national address database by working with authoritative partners from all levels of government. So why DOT for this? Well, one of the components of DOT is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and the National 911 program is housed at NHTSA. In addition, DOT leads the transportation theme of the NSDI, and that includes Federal Highways Administration's All Roads Network. And we all know you can't really have an address point without a road that it's tied to. And as Matt said, DOT co-leads the address theme of the NSDI. So here's a quick timeline for the past 7 years. Back in April of 2015, DOT hosted the National Address Database Summit, and we had stakeholders from all levels of government, the private sector, and nonprofits. Although we went heavy on participation from statewide address programs, and each statewide program was asked to bring a county representative that provided data. The group decided that there was unanimous support for creation of an open national address database. And as a result of the discussions in that summit, DOT kicked off a pilot that ran from October 2015 through July of 2016. As part of that pilot, we developed a minimum content schema for our national data set. We incorporated address data from 7 state partners and 11 county partners. In this case, all 11 counties were from the state of Missouri, who did not have a statewide program. And at the end of the pilot, we published release 1 of the National Address Database, and that was 16.9 million records. We were dormant for a year after that pilot, looking for resources. And in July of 2017, the National 911 program that I had mentioned in the previous slide, they started funding the development of the National Address Database, and they're still funding it to this day. So the model that we follow to build this data set, and we follow it in almost every case. There are some exclusions we'll talk about later, but we realize that the authoritative information is collected at the local government level. So the ideal model is for that local data to flow upwards and be compiled once at the state level, and then the statewide data is submitted to DOT and compiled into a national data set. We do provide some elementary quality control on the data. We look for duplicates. We look for values that are outside our published domains, and we provide a report back to our partners with our findings from the QA/QC. And our vision is to have this data also serve as a national geocoder. We're still wrestling with that a little bit because the data set's not complete, but our colleagues at Esri are looking into using the database as a geocoder, where they will check the national address database first, and if the data doesn't exist there, they'll go to a commercial data set. We also can see that once this database becomes more widely used, that we can have some crowdsourcing information come back for quality control, that we'd want it to be vetted since this is an authoritative database. So by that, I mean any information we get from crowdsource would go back to the local data experts, the authorities, and they would either verify it or dismiss it. This is the high-level look at the minimum content guideline that we developed during the pilot and we still follow today. But it's 3 basic components. The first is the address itself, and it's a fully parsed address. The second is the geographic location. Latitude and longitude is provided by our partners as it is geospatial data, but most of them don't have the national grid coordinates. We agreed to add those at the request of FEMA, and as part of our ingest process, we calculate the national grid coordinates. And finally, we have some metadata items that are in our schema as well. So this is a quick look at the growth over the 7 years we've been working on it. You can see back in the first release in July of 16, it was the 16.8 million records, and flatlined there until July of the next year when we finally received the resources for development. We have since then released 8 more versions of the NAD. The latest release, which is 8, was published in late November of last year, and it's 65.5 million records. The next release, release 9, we are finalizing now, and it will be published by the end of February. So this is a true partnership effort. There's no carrot and there's no stick coming from the federal government to get authoritative governments to participate in this. So to date, we have 36 committed state partners. Some have committed to be partners before they've completed a program. So only a statewide address program. Only 27 of the 36 partners have provided data to date. And not every one of the 27 is complete. Most of them are, but some are missing counties here and there. The most interesting part to me is we have now 25 county partners, 2 city partners, an MPO partner, and a tribal partner, and they're all coming from states that either don't have a statewide address program or they have address data, but they consider it protected, so it's not in the public domain. And with the exception of the Missouri counties I mentioned earlier, all of these came to me through our National Address Database website and asked, how can we include our data? So it is a partnership effort, and by and large, all of the partners or all of the providers of address database realize the importance of this, and they want to contribute their data. With each release, we produce a series of maps, and this is the first one. We call it our partners map, and it's by state. So the dark green states are the ones that are partners and have submitted data. The yellow states are committed partners that have yet to submit data. They're not quite there yet. And then we have the 2 purples. The dark purple are unfortunate. They're states that have complete data, but it's protected at the moment. And the light purple are states that don't have a statewide program and at this time aren't working towards building a statewide program. And you'll see the hash marks on here. Those indicate the purple states that where local governments, city governments, tribal governments have wanted their data in the NAD, so they have distributed it. They have distributed it in lieu of a statewide submittal. This is the second map, and it shows by county the completeness. You'll see California is a partner, but they've only submitted 1 county so far. Most of the green states are complete. You'll see a couple of holes in Texas, a couple of holes in Arkansas, but it's a work in progress, and it's growing with each release. This is our age of data map. Keeps us honest and keeps us on top of having current data. The green is our good stuff. The dark green is less than 6 months. The light green is less than a year. And you can see most of our partner states are less than a year old. We do have some outliers. Ohio and Missouri are the oldest data. I expect a submission, an update of the counties in Missouri. I expect it this week. It might not make the next release. Ohio's had some troubles. I don't have a time frame for getting an update from them, but this is not meant to be a map of shame, but it shows the age of the data from our partners. This is cumulative funding for the NAD so far. And as I mentioned, there's no carrot and no stick. And because there's no carrot and no stick, there's really very little resources as well. In the first 2 years of development, we had enough money for a 3/4 time developer. And in the last 2 years, the resources were increased and we were able to employ a full-time developer. So you can see over the 7 years, and this includes funding the original summit and the pilot, we've spent just over $1 million in development of this database. And that comes out based on the last release with 65.5 million records, that comes out to only 1.6 cents per address point.
Steve, if I may, we're coming up on 10:35, 10:36.
Okay, almost done. We're getting support from some good organizations as well. The National Geospatial Advisory Committee and the National States Geographic Information Council. In fact, the NGAC was in support of a national address database before we even started. The first quote here is from a 2014 NGAC white paper. And I'm not going to read it, but as I said in some of my opening slides, address data are perhaps the most widely used of geographic information. In 2018, after we'd been under development for a couple of years, the NGAC published a resolution where they strongly encouraged all FGDC agencies to support this effort. And in 2020, the National States Geographic Information Council made it one of their primary advocacy priorities. And you can see here that working together, we can save lives, reduce costs, avoid duplication, increase revenues, improve service, and foster efficient and effective government. Over the past few months, we've also gotten the private sector looking at our data. I got a couple of quotes here from a 2021 NISGIC press release. The first is from Holly Howard at Google, and I think she's actually in the audience today. But she states that the NAD is a trusted data source that will allow Google Maps to more seamlessly keep its US map accurate and up to date. And then Rob Hoyler from TomTom also provided a quote for that press release, and something that we all believe, that access to open, authoritative geospatial data such as the NAD will allow private sector companies such as TomTom to more effectively contribute towards impactful solutions that will benefit the general public. So it's current state of the NAD. Release 8 is what's out there and available right now. That's the one with 65.5 million records. Release 9 will be published towards the end of this month. We offer it right now only as a bulk download, and these are links here for the download formats. We have the Esri file geodatabase and a flat ASCII. And you can always find the current status of the NAD at our DOT website, which I have a link for there. Coming soon, we are currently working on an ArcGIS story map that will contain an ArcGIS Online based visualization tool. And a little bit further out, we're going to work on an ArcGIS portal, which will allow us to have something different than just bulk download for distributing the data. And that's what I have. We're holding questions for the end, but thanks for your interest in this subject.
Steve, thank you very much. You'll see a lot of questions came in while you were talking, so you really caught our interest. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll now move to Liz Flake from U.S. Postal Service. Liz is the Manager for Address Quality Programs within the USPS National Customer Support Center in Memphis, Tennessee. She'll be sharing with us how the USPS uses geospatial technology to enhance their applications. Liz, over to you.
Thanks, Ed. Good morning, everyone. So I'll try to keep this brief. So like Ed said, I just want to go over how the Postal Service uses geospatial technology in some of our internal applications and some of our external applications. So just kind of go over that. So the USPS leverages geospatial information to enhance many of our technologies. We overlay our existing data with geospatial information, and it helps us better understand complex data relationships. Some of the examples of what we do with it is like we evaluate rural routes to see if they're accurate. We are using it to enhance some of our programs and products. In AMS, we have over 161 million addresses in our database. We work closely with the local addressing authorities to get these addresses. These are actually addresses that we deliver mail to. So we don't make up the addresses. We have to work with the local addressing authorities to get that information. But we have 161 million. This is an example of where we had a major weather event. This was for Hurricane Harvey, you may remember. And this is how we used the geospatial information internally. So we quickly stood up a map for the weather event, and we could show in real time, we could show all of our postal staff what locations were being closed due to the weather. So they quickly had a real-time thing that they could see. So if it went red, then that meant that facility was closed. And then they would come back online. They would change back to blue as they were online. So this was very helpful during when we have major events like that. That's how we use the geospatial data. This is our everyday every door direct mail application. This is something that we provide. Customers can order this. They can do submit mailings, for certain areas. And what this allows to do, so we don't have to give customers the address that we're mailing to. We can just tell them how many flyers or whatever they want to submit, so they can go online, and we use the geospatial technology to map out the route, so that you can see the blue line that kind of shows you the route of the area the customer selected. And we overlay that information from our AMS, and we'll tell them, okay, there's 738 deliveries in this route. If you want to make a, mail to them, you can exclude residential. You have a bunch of criteria that you can pick at the top, and it'll tell them how much it's going to cost them to do that mailing. We have also seen incorrect third-party address information, and what we do is we use our the carriers as they're delivering mail. We kind of collect their coordinates, and we collect it through their mobile delivery devices, or MDDs. And we, in this example, we had what we thought was an incorrect coordinate based on where the carrier is always delivering the mail. This dashboard is just something we have internally that kind of gives us a pulse of that monitors our delivery address geolocations. So kind of focusing on the right over here, we have 99.9%. We have them geocoded, the addresses that are in AMS. And then we have what we call an enhanced mailbox and enhanced door coordinates. And we have a 93.9% confidence on the mailbox and a 76.1% confidence on the door. And you may ask me, how do we determine enhanced? So what we do again is we leverage that MDD data, and when we take the package scans over a period of time, and I don't know what the period of time is, but there's some math to it. So we kind of look at it to get build up a confidence that the carrier's always delivering either at this location or at the door. The next couple of slides, I kind of want to talk about some changes that we're making in AMS, and these are related around customer issues or customer concerns or complaints that we've gotten from our customers. It doesn't really impact anything with us how we're delivering the mail, but this is an example of the preferred last line. So in AMS, we have a preferred last line, and that's always the city name of where the post office is located. So we hear from customers a lot because they get frustrated because on their mail, it gets, when it gets addressed, we're addressing them so that the mail gets delivered, and we use the post office name. But it's not actually where the customer lives. So they get very frustrated that their mail can't represent their address that they live in. So we're listening to them. We're making changes to our city state file to incorporate this, where we'll be able to return, and the software that returns codes addresses will return the city name of where the customer lives. So in this example, this customer lives in Piperton, Tennessee, but their post office is Collierville. So today, when you run their address through address matching software, it always is going to return Collierville. So we're trying to make changes to incorporate the correct city name for the customer. Another issue that we have in AMS, and it's not really an issue for us, but it's an issue for customers. So there's instances where post office facility delivers to a neighboring state. So in this example, this post office is actually in Minnesota, and the customer actually lives in South Dakota. And, you know, it was the reason that we did this because it was cost effective for a post office, for the carriers in that post office to cross over a state line to deliver, because you can see how far the nearest post office is for the customer. If we use the South Dakota one, it just made more business sense for the Postal Service to use the post office that was actually closer to them. But it causes issues for the customer. So anytime they get their mail, you know, their addresses, it shows them that they're living in Minnesota, but they don't live in Minnesota. They live in South Dakota. So they have problems with their driver's license. They have all kinds of could have potential problems with, you know, other things because everything shows Minnesota on it, but they actually live in South Dakota. So we're putting in a process that's going to go in probably this summer to address this. It's going to actually change the state. So the customer, it'll reflect the correct state. So when it goes through CAS software, it'll come out with the correct state on the customers. And there's like 6,300 records that we have in AMS that kind of fall into this. So it's not a huge number, but it's a huge problem. If it was, you know, for one customer, it's a problem. And we're listening to the complaints that we're getting from customers and seeing how we can incorporate things to make it better for them. And that's all I've got today. Thank you.
Liz, thank you very much. And clearly this panel has really touched raised a lot of issues in people's minds. There's a ton of questions. What I'd like to do is pick some for discussion and run long, since we have a schedule change in the next session. One speaker had to cancel, so we can take a little bit of extra time if there's discussion. And also maybe the panelists, some of the questions I think can be answered pretty simply in the chat. So panelists, if you want to look through the chat and see if you pick any questions that you can give a concise answer to, we can take those. Don't need to merit discussion. But I want to start with one that Kara Utter raised from Idaho. She says she got very accurate zip code data for her county, and she wants to give that to the census, and they have responded they have no way of absorbing the data. So given that the aggregated zip code Tiger data is not accurate, as our GIS layers that you found with USPS sites, Kara was hoping that Census would be able to develop a process to be able to absorb more accurate zip code data, just as they do for the BAS and other annual programs. So Matt, do you think this would be a possibility in the future? I'll toss that to you first. And Liz, if you want to chime in at the end with some additional standpoints, observations from the USPS point of view, I'd welcome that too. Matt? Matt, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I've been messaging with Kara about her question, but I didn't want to take up the other chat areas in this. But so the Census Bureau, when it comes to producing spatial data products, does not produce zip codes. We produce what's called zip code tabulation areas, or ZICTAs. And these are our own unique product, but they are not zip codes. What we use zip code information for at the Census Bureau is primarily tied to addresses. So when we mail a census questionnaire out to a decennial census respondent or a survey respondent, that piece of mail will get to the correct unit. and that's through our partnership with the USPS. So we don't produce zip code spatial data products. We produce ZICDAs. The USPS is the authoritative source for zip codes.
Liz, anything to add to that?
Yeah, what Matt said is correct. So I was trying to go find another slide that I actually thought I was going to put in this presentation, but I took it out. But let me go find it. And it kind of shows you the breakdown. The zip code means certain things to the Postal Service about how we route the mail through the system and what facilities it goes to. Certain numbers represent the state and vice versa. I'm going to take a minute to go find that slide. So I don't know if you want to go to another question, and I can share it in just a second.
Sure. Steve, the next one I think has a pretty quick answer, and I think you've already given some of it, but can private companies join and listen in on the subgroups, the NAD subgroup meetings and get minutes?
Yes, they can. That anybody is free to join in the subcommittee and the subgroups. Only right now with the governance model, only feds have a vote, but anybody's free to join and contribute and provide input.
And just quickly, has the military been involved in these nationwide efforts for addressing? And have you been communicating with the state GIOs and other information officers?
State GIOs for sure. They were basically NISJIC is the organization of state GIOs, and they were a driving force and a factor in DOT's decision to become involved in this. The military we have talked with, they are putting together by a branch of military, they are putting together address points for every military installation. They think they can share those when they're done, but it's going to have to be approved by higher ups than I've been dealing with. So I'm hopeful that we'll get address points for military bases at some point.
All right. Matt, there's been a question whether is the Census 2020 data finalized, or are there still ongoing efforts by the Census Bureau? So when downloading data in 2000, all the related attribute information was included in the Tiger files. When reviewing the 2020 data, you need to join the tables based on GeoID, assuming possibly because more data is being collected. Will there be a fully joined and attributed FGDB shape files that can be downloaded for internal use and analysis? Or do people have to do the join themselves?
So I'm not sure the answer to the second part of the question about fully joined data. So I'll see what I can find out and get back to you, Ed, and hope that you'll take the message to the rest of URISA. In terms of the data releases for 2020, they are on a schedule. So some of the 2020 census data has been released, and other data products are still waiting to be released. In terms of a potential joined data product to something like Esri Geo databases, I think that would probably be something that would be later on in the release schedule. If such a product is planning to be released.
All right. Liz, you back yet? Okay. We see your screen, but you're muted, maybe.
Sorry, let me see. Let me stop share because I don't know if you're seeing my email or not. Hold on. You find the one I want you to see. Let me see. Sorry, this is on my desktop and I'm having to remote into it. Can y'all see the screen?
Yes.
Oh, let me go down. It's not very big on my side. So it's this kind of goes over the 11 digit, but it's showing you the first 3 digits. You know, it's showing you the breakdown of the 5 digits. So you can see it kind of drills in. So a 7 is in this part of the country. Different things. It's kind of showing you how it drills down for this particular zip code. So we use it for internal information to tell us, you know, what facility, sectional center facility that's delivering this mail. And then it goes down. It means something to the Postal Service. And there was some more questions around for me, I think, like something about zip codes that somebody asked.
One question that I think everybody would have an interest in is, how do we get our hands on all this great data you have?
Well, we're not going to be able to release our data because I think someone told you earlier in their presentation we're protected by Title 39. So we have very restrictions on what we can or cannot release. We do have, you know, ZIP+4 data, and you know, that data doesn't include any of the geospatial information that we've been collecting that we use for our internal stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that's protected. So we're protected. We just can't release all the actual addresses in the country.
Can you release coordinates associated with addresses?
Not at this time. I mean, that would have to be something go up higher than my pay grade to release those, but that's not something that we're able to do at this moment.
Just asking.
Yeah.
Is the geocoder available as a service?
Today, it's not.
For checking. One question, how do you handle addresses that do not receive mail, but the customer has a PO box? Do you have a physical address in your system for that customer?
We do. We do have, for some customers, we have what we call we call it a R77. It's on a R77 carrier route. And what that means is we put some of these addresses in there for customers that don't really have, we don't deliver to their address, but they get it at the mailbox, at the PO box. It's called PBSAs is what we refer to them in the Postal Service, but yeah, they are in the database. And we did that to allow them so customers could get mail from other carriers besides the Postal Service, because there's some carriers that won't even take a PO box for a customer.
And is that something that's available to the public or to paying customers?
Yeah, it's in our data.
Okay.
That you can purchase.
All right. How do you determine the community name for someone who is in an unincorporated area?
Again, we work with the local addressing authorities to do that. And we, you know, if it's an unincorporated area, we don't have all of those in the database. So there's a lot of those that we don't have just because we don't deliver to them.
And I think the last question for this session, is there a way for local government GIS departments to request a list of USPS delivery addresses down to the apartment or unit level in their city, county, region to confirm all addresses are represented in their GIS data?
And is this a government that's requesting this?
This question comes from Deb Roseboom, who is, she has worked in government before, I believe, but now works for a private vendor. But she's asking on behalf, you know, is there a way for a local government GIS department?
Yeah, we probably would have to enter into an agency agreement with them to do that, interagency agreement.
Is that a difficult, lengthy, tedious process that takes years to complete, or is that something that can be done pretty quickly and standard?
No, I mean, it's something that has to go through our legal department.
Oh, okay. All right, so yeah, a lot of the of your data is protected to protect the privacy of the customers.
And we do have, let me just go back a little bit. So we do have a county project that we can work with local government agencies where they could send us their list and we could see if they're all in AMS or not. So we do have that process if it's a government on that they could leverage today.
All right. I'd invite the panelists to scroll through the chat questions. I think we covered most of them. If you want to give a written answer that is more authoritative or more concise and precise, feel free to do so. It would be greatly appreciated by the audience.